ladies and gentlemen, we will be getting started shortly, so if you do want another drink or some more cheese and fruit, I encourage you guys to go grab that now. We will be closing that down in about 2 to 3 minutes. So go ahead, find your seats, and we'll get started shortly. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Kim Guise. I'm Vice President for People and Culture here at the National World War II Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to We Can Do It, Female Achievements in the Workplace Since World War II. This event is part of the museum's commemoration of Women's History Month and National Rosie the Riveter Day. And I'm excited to tell you I had a moment to meet with our wonderful panel, and I think you're in for an exciting conversation tonight, so I'm looking forward to it. In keeping with our museum traditions, I'd like to begin by recognizing any World War II veterans, home front workers, or Holocaust survivors in the audience tonight, or joining us virtually. Please stand or wave your hands so that we can see that you're here. It's our honor to pay tribute to all of them for their service every day here at the museum. Secondly, I'd like to recognize all other veterans and active duty military in attendance. Please stand or wave so that we can acknowledge you. Thank you all so much for your service and sacrifice and for joining us tonight. I'd now also like to take a moment to recognize the former and current board members of the Board of Trustees in attendance or viewing online, and those who are joining us in person. Suzanne Medier, there she is, and Sonia Perez, who's serving on our panel. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for your dedicated service to the museum. Tonight, we also have members of our Patriot Circle, as well as charter members in attendance. If you're here, please wave your hand so we can acknowledge you. Thank you so much. Your support makes programs like these possible. Thank you for your continued commitment to the museum and to our educational mission. So tonight's program is one of the many educational initiatives of the museum designed to shed light on the role that women played during World War II. The wartime image of Rosie the Riveter, a working woman serving sleeves up on the home front, has become an icon for strong women across many U.S. industries. During World War II, millions of Rosies blazed a path by taking factory jobs traditionally occupied by men. Their efforts paved the way for women to lead in all industries. Before we hear from our esteemed panel tonight, I'd like to ask that you help me welcome my colleague, Kim Guise. Kim is the museum's senior curator and director of curatorial services, and she's going to come and give us a little historical lesson that'll give our panel a little context. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, Kim. You mentioned the lasting appeal of Rosie the Riveter, and I hope you all had a chance to check out many versions in the Jefferson Parish student artwork on display in the hallway afterward. If you didn't earlier, please do later. The evolution of Rosie and her staying power alone is an inspiration. The Rosie poster was inspired by a song and was preceded by a very different version of Rosie the Riveter by Norman Rockwell. But the Rosie most familiar to us was part of a propaganda campaign designed to spur production among women workers at the Westinghouse Corporation. It was intended to hang for only 2 weeks in February 1943. So I think it did its job, right? She did her job. Nearly 80 years later, she's still being used as a symbol for female empowerment and can-do attitude. One of our most popular past interactives was the Make Your Own propaganda poster, where you could stand in front of a backdrop and pose as Rosie the Riveter. And in 2014, this is an interesting little side story. In 2014, we had a visit from another icon, Beyonce, who took part in this interactive and posted her photo posing on Instagram. So immediately, that photo had over 1.4 million likes. It was a fun moment here. American women were always present in the workforce, whether paid or unpaid, working for their families in homes, churches, family businesses, on farms. But the recognition of the value of women as workers and the type of work they performed varied widely over time and was often driven by the American economy, political climate, and world events. Attitudes and opportunities shifted back and forth, swinging one way or the other. And during World War II, the pendulum swung wide in one direction, and after, in the 1950s, moved back in the other direction, with opportunities appearing and then receding. But with each swing toward equality, some opportunities remained as opinions changed and women gained confidence. During the Industrial Revolution, women worked in factories and mills in large numbers with little pay, few rights, long hours. Later, World War I opened new opportunities for women, some of the same opportunities we see during World War II. Opportunities, right? Munitions work in transportation, and in other areas traditionally occupied by men. Also in World War I, around 12,000 women were permitted to enlist in the US Navy. They performed clerical duties and also worked as truck drivers, mechanics, radio operators, telephone operators, translators, and munitions workers. They had the same responsibilities as their male counterparts and received the same pay. During the Great Depression, attitudes towards women's work changed when employment opportunities overall shrank. This particularly affected married women. Married women were in many cases barred from employment altogether. This practice had been in effect for decades, but was more prominent during the 1930s. The Economy Act of 1932 included a section that required the federal government to fire one member of each married couple working in government. By 1940, 26 states restricted married women's employment in state government jobs. And women overall faced pressure to leave jobs so as not to be seen as competing with men for the short supply of employment, short supply of jobs. So fast forward just a couple of years. During World War II, the country saw its greatest need for industry and production while experiencing an enormous void in the workforce caused by the needs of the US Armed Forces for male workers. The global war created a range of opportunities for women in uniform, on the job front, and on the home front. Women were an essential part of the arsenal of democracy. In 1940, about 12 million women were in the workforce. And by 1945, by the end of the war, over 19 million women were employed. More women entered the workforce, and there was also a shift in the type of work that they performed. Women left lower-paying jobs, such as waitressing or domestic work, for higher-paying factory jobs, often those traditionally performed by men. Patriotism and the drive to bring the boys home sooner was one side of the coin. The other was the challenge of new opportunity and a new wage. In 2014, I met and interviewed a war worker, Mildred Opa. We actually have a photo of her. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, no, you can see her. She's standing in the bottom left photograph. She is to the right of the man in the hat, the one man in the photo. So that's Mildred Opa, and she was I interviewed her in Westwego, Louisiana. At the start of the war, she was working for the telephone company in New Orleans when she heard of an opportunity for women to become welders. She left the telephone company and got a job at Delta Shipbuilding Company, building giant Liberty ships on the Industrial Canal. A big part of her motivation was the paycheck for her 8-hour shift at the rate of $1.25 an hour. Money makes you do a lot of things, she told me. It was hard and dangerous work, but she was able to save money and send some back to her family in Bayou Black. The economic impact on women is echoed in a somewhat humorous letter in the museum's collection. In 1943, Herschel Berkowitz wrote his brother Samuel from Willow Run Air Base, where he was doing advanced training with an anti-aircraft unit. Willow Run Bomber Plant is where around 9,000 B-24s were constructed, and PFC Berkowitz wrote, "I am now in Michigan, and I'm at Henry Ford's bomber plant. There are so many women that you just have to stand on the street corner, and they come and pick you up." It gets better. You don't have to worry about money, for they make so much money out here that they don't know what to do with it. So here is where I shine in and help them spend it. It wasn't all about money, though. The women pushed themselves. Opa described practicing different welds just for fun. She said they would experiment and try things out to see what they could do. She also said that she and the other women welders worked harder than the men in their shop, who didn't have as much at stake. And she claimed that one could spot the difference between a woman's weld and a man's. The women welded in smooth, neat lines, whereas the men who had nothing to prove showed a less meticulous approach. This is according to Opa. We did not perform any tests. So Opa attributed this to a more carefree attitude. They didn't care, but we did. We wanted to do good, so we did. Ultimately, her advice to young women today, or I guess in 2014, younger women today, is to follow your mind. When I heard about the school for welders, I jumped at that right away. I said, this is what I want to do, and I succeeded and did it. Another inspiring worker that I had the honor of meeting was Grace Gennoda Brown. She worked at Consolidated Aircraft in Fort Worth, Texas. She had been working at the University of Texas tea room, but found herself out of a job when the tea room became a Navy mess hall. So, wanting to work and to contribute to the war effort, she trained to become a machinist, which she did from 1942 to 1945. And Grace is featured in a photograph in our Manufacturing Victory Gallery in the Arsenal of Democracy exhibit. And we had a celebrity moment, not unlike Beyonce, maybe. We had a celebrity moment when Grace visited and a line of people formed waiting to take their picture with her next to her photo in the gallery. Grace was the first individual that we interviewed for a new initiative that we're working on, Voices from the Front interactive exhibit, which utilizes artificial intelligence to enable a simulated conversation with someone about their wartime experiences. So that interview, 1,500 questions, took place in November of last year, just a few weeks prior to Grace's 100th birthday. And apparently, she's still talking about it. So I look forward to that exhibit in the near future here at the museum. But in the meantime, check out Grace's story in our gallery. A major initiative in our future is an exhibition devoted to the more than 350,000 American women who volunteered to serve in the US military during World War II, as WACs, as WAVEs, SPARs, Marines, as nurses, and also as WASP pilots. I'm currently curating that exhibition, and I'm working with a panel of advisors, largely female historians, experts in the field of women's service. In our exhibition, Our War II Women in Service will feature some of the barriers to women's service and also the important roles that women played in the military and the foundation they laid for those who came after them, like one of our panelists, Colonel Bernardo, with a legacy that extends into the present day. We have another veteran with us in the audience, Pat Jernigan, who's a friend and advisor as well. And she put it simply, their outstanding performance convinced the brass that women were useful. In service and in production, women face societal bias, familial opposition, and many also additionally contended with racism. They also faced real physical challenges. Women lacked proper facilities, proper uniforms and equipment. The daughter of a WASP, one of the 1,000 women who trained as pilots, told me stories of how her mom and others referred to the various planes they flew as one booker or two bookers, referring to the number of manuals they had to sit on to reach the controls. Another recounted how she initially failed the lung capacity test until she repeated it, having removed her bra. And that's actually the woman in the very top right of this photograph. Her daughter told me that story. The often very tiny women flew every type of military aircraft that existed in US supply in World War II. They were indeed role models and remain so. In 2018, I met with 3 generations of a WASP. The youngest, still in grammar school, had dressed not as Amelia Earhart for Halloween, but as great-grandma Dorothy. It's difficult in 10 minutes to encompass all of the achievements of women during World War II and their lasting impact, but women were a vital part of the American story in World War II and how the war was won. Their experiences served as inspiration for those who came after them, just as the women we'll hear from shortly inspire us and female leaders yet to come. Thank you.
Let's thank Kim again. She does amazing work here and for sharing those stories with us. We appreciate it. And, so I think this really gives us a sense of how women who stepped up during World War II really did pave the way for us. And, 80 years later, still influence, the role that women play in the workplace. And so at this time, I'm not going to take up more time because I know we want to get to our panel, but I want you to give me a moment to talk about an achiever, our moderator for tonight. She is a traffic anchor, a segment host, and fitness and wellness expert. Please help me welcome April Dupree of WWL TV Channel 4 to the stage, along with all of our panelists who will come up and take their seats now. So thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies. While y'all are having a seat, I'll introduce myself again. Thank you so much, Kim. My name is April Dupree. As she mentioned, I am a familiar face in the morning, so I've been up very early. So if I stumble over some words, y'all, give me grace. I've been up since like 2:30. But my name is April Dupree, and again, I am the traffic anchor and segment host at WWL TV, as well as being the founder of a fitness and wellness company here in New Orleans called Footprints to Fitness, and I also am the executive director of a fitness and wellness nonprofit called Footprints Foundation. Y'all are like, that is a hell of a lot of things. I wear a lot of hats, and hopefully I do you guys justice this evening because we have such an amazing group of panelists. I'm honestly humbled to share this experience with you guys. So thank you so much for that. Our panel discussion will be amazing. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce everyone, and then if you guys have any questions towards the end, we will get there. But first, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Sonia Perez. She's the president of AT&T Southeast States and vice chair of the Board of Trustees of the National WWII Museum. And our next panelist, a familiar face that I'm sure you guys all know, Cynthia Lee Shane. She is the Jefferson Parish president. Our next panelist is Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes, interim commissioner of the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, as well as being the athletic director of Dillard University. And y'all, these headshots are on point. I need to get with y'all's photographer. They look amazing. Our next panelist is Colonel Sheila Bernardo. She is a U.S. Army retired, president of the Advisory Committee to the USO and the African American Military History Museum in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Our next panelist is Auntie Glandis, CEO of Landis Construction. Our next panelist, Adrena Kelly, Executive Director of BNOLA Black Education for New Orleans. And our final panelist for this evening, Jennifer Bolin Masterson, Director of Michoud Operations Space Launch Center for Boeing. Let me guess, the Boeing crew is in here full effect. Just a thought. All right, guys, tonight's first question will go to all of our panelists, and you guys will answer in the order in which you're seated. We're going to start with Sonia Perez. Sonia, you look nervous, girl. You all right?
I'm ready.
All right, girl.
I was born ready.
We were all born ready. That's right. Just a little bit earlier, Kim Guise of the National WWII Museum gave us a wonderful overview of the historical contributions of women during World War II. When reflecting on the challenges and success of your career, what inspiration do you draw from the women who came before you during the World War II era and, of course, beyond?
Thank you, April, and thank you to the museum and its staff for giving all of us the opportunity to really represent by being here today. And thank you to all of you for your interest. So the first thing I'd like to do is point out that one of the women that Kimberly referred to when she was giving us a historical overview is that the woman was employed at a telecommunications company. So very proud, very proud of that. But the thing that, I'll tell you, the thing that drew me to working at AT&T for now 42 years is that the opportunity was there, right? And there are days when it's tough, when we're working very hard 24/7, say in the face of the aftermath of a hurricane. And I think to myself about how hard my mother worked and how hard my grandmother worked and my great-grandmother worked and the obstacles that challenged them. My family, I'm a fifth-generation Texan. My family was originally living in the part of the state between the Nueces River and the Guadalupe River. And when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848, and the United States doubled its territory by winning much of Mexico's, my family chose to become American citizens when they could have gone back to Mexico. And I think about how hard that was for them to make their life here. And then I also think about how history repeats itself, right? And how the repatriation of Mexican Americans in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, and then later, right after the Great Depression came, because it was thought that Mexican Americans were taking the jobs of American citizens, right? Much like women's government jobs were taken away because they were taking the jobs, supposedly, of men. So on days when it's really hard, I draw my inspiration by thinking about all of those real challenges and obstacles that my great-grandparents overcame to get me to where I am today, to be able to make the kind of choices that I've made for my education. My parents actually stopped migrating north to pick crops when my mother became pregnant with me, because they understood the importance of an education, and they wanted their children to have the education that they never got. And so I get the chills sometimes. I'm really blessed to have been born into the family that I was. It gives me great inspiration every day.
That's a blessing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Next, we have Cynthia Lee Shane.
So I think what women did back then, and I think this is just, what happens through the generations, is you just follow your life story. I think of that, and it's hard to look at those pictures and not tie it to what's going on now. I don't want to get political, but the Ukraine and Russia, and these women are leaving their country with the children, leaving the men behind. Some of them are going to get their husbands back, some of them aren't. And how you navigate that when you think your life is going to go a certain way and then it doesn't, how you're able to navigate that, how you survive that. And so whenever I think of that, that is what I say is common. And it's hard for me to ever talk about my career or my life without speaking about my journey. My husband died very suddenly, completely healthy at a parade. That night, I was by myself, having to raise 2 kids all alone. So, how do you cope with that? And what makes you brave in life is that you're a survivor. And once you go through something very difficult, everything else seems kind of simpler, where it's a big deal for somebody else who maybe hasn't had to go through a hard time. If you've had to go through a hard time, and many of you know what you're talking about, maybe you survived cancer, you had loss, you had something terrible happen to you, it's these kind of strange, and it's hard to use the word, there's these gifts that you get that lets you be, it's your journey. It's just the journey of life that you have. And so, we will be talking about the women of the Ukraine in the future and how they were able to do it, because they're navigating that right now. And history does repeat itself, but it's just how we handle what life throws at us, how nimble we are, how emotionally intelligent we are, how much of a fighter we are. These are common things, common to men and women, and these are the characteristics that I say string through generations.
Thank you. That's such an amazing answer, for sure. Next, we have Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. So when I reflect on challenges and success, and I had an opportunity to do some research. So if you didn't know, on March 14th, and I'm going to read this, I had to write this down because I wanted to get it right. President Joe Biden signed a bill into law that awards a Congressional Gold Medal to the women of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, nicknamed the 6888. This unit was a unit of all Black women who went to Great Britain to assist with the mail. There was an issue where our troops weren't getting their mail. They needed some people to get it done. And so I read that, I was like, oh my gosh. Y'all, they were so inspirational that they came up with their own motto. Their motto was no mail, low morale. And so I'm sitting here thinking about, I was like, but we're going through racism at that time. Like at that time, for black women, you know, it was the double-edged sword. You had racism, then you had sexism, and there was an opportunity for them to contribute to a purpose that was larger than they were. And not only were they committed to that purpose, but they were able to see the significance in the fact that if we can get them messages from home, from people who care about them, that's going to help us achieve our goal. And so I sat there and I thought about what level of emotional intelligence does it take to not even be seen as significant, but to provide significance? What level of emotional intelligence? And so what I get inspiration from and what I believe has happened throughout the years as we talk is you learn that you don't need permission to make a difference and to provide significance, because significance is the greatest reward that we can offer. They figured out, regardless of the conditions, regardless of the circumstances, that they could make a difference in this country having an opportunity to move forward so that we could be who we are. And that's what I draw inspiration from, that one, I don't need permission. And if I can find a way to make a difference and be positive, then we're gonna do that. And so I draw inspiration from that, because when you look at the life for black women, who have had to deal with both, that is the road we have had to travel, where it's not always been acknowledged. Like, this is what, 50, well, I don't know how many years, okay, don't talk about my math right now. Okay, that was 1945, it's 2022. However many years ago, there was no acknowledgement when they came back. And just in 2022, they were just acknowledged. And so when you think about that level of sacrifice, that's what I draw inspiration from.
Let the church say amen, girl. Come on. Next, we have Colonel Sheila Barnado.
Good evening. It's humbling. And I would like to thank Dr. Baker Barnes for sharing a story that I was planning to share, but that's okay.
Great minds think alike. That's all that means.
That's absolutely the case. And it just shows you that we draw inspiration from the same group of women. And so I represent, of course, the military on this panel. And when she was giving the historical perspective, when I came in, and I won't say when, I had my military career and I'm now retired, but I came in and the Women's Army Corps still existed. So I came in as a WAC. And so I'm living history because the WAC still existed when I came in. I was trained at Fort McClellan, Alabama, the home of the WAC, the Women's Army Corps. And then immediately, though, the Army was transitioning women into the regular Army. So all of my assignments after the Fort McClellan experience was as a part of integrated units, men and women, when I say integrated. The services had already integrated the races previously to my service, but it was the first time that they were then moving women into serve with men. And so, but as I thought about that, reflecting on challenges and an inspiration, the first thing for military service, where it really is, and you hear people say service, they don't say a job, they don't say, whatever, it is service, because it's service at the highest level, meaning that when you go in, and you fully don't understand this when you sign that contract and you take the oath, in my case, you don't really understand, but you sign up for it. But you soon come to realize, as they finally say, Uncle Sam really does own you, because your service is 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and if it needs to roll over 24 hours or so, it will. And that's service. And so the first thing that you have to come to grips with, or certainly I did, in order to have successful service, is self-awareness. It was a quick lesson in self-awareness, self-development, self-control, self-discipline, all those things that I found anyway I had to have because I came in as a second lieutenant, and what that means is from the moment you walk in the door, you are viewed as and expected to be a leader. Now, I can tell you, as a 25-year-old woman, I had already gotten my education by then, I was not, or I didn't view myself as a leader. So it was a process, but it started with me. I had to believe and understand that I could become that leader that they were expecting of me. I was not that leader at day one, but I knew if I wanted to be successful, I had to become that leader. And so it was my own self-development and belief that I was a leader. And then I do draw strength during challenging times. I don't think about the successes because it's the challenges that I learned the most from. So I think about historically, when I came in, like I said, they were integrating. Prior to that, and during the time that she referred to, it was women served in women's units and men served in the real Army. So I didn't deal with that as a challenge. When I came in, they were actively seeking women to become officers because even they recognized that they didn't have enough. By the time I came in, all of our promotions were a centralized promotion system. And so it was a fairer kind of system. We were not subjected necessarily to the whims of just whomever you worked for in that moment. They certainly had a role because they wrote your report card, but it was a centralized process in DC, Washington, D.C. And so I feel like you got a fairer shake. And then you served side by side with men. And so you were looked at, once you had proven yourself, of course, as a full member of the team. You were not looked at as, oh, that's that woman, or that's that, female officer. No, once you were a part of the team, you were a part of the team. And women like Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early, who commanded the 6WWII Central Postal Directory Battalion. And I think about her. They were given a mission, but they weren't given any support, really, to do that mission. They were just sent over en masse to Europe and told, okay, clear out millions and millions and millions of pieces of mail. And they literally went over there. They had to find their own lodging. They had to set up their own, they literally had to do everything. They didn't get any support. I didn't face that. I never had a situation where the Army sent me somewhere and they didn't support me. And so I think about those things when I went through the challenges that I went through, and of course we all do. But when you put it in the proper perspective, then it inspired me to just continue on day by day, no matter what, because what I was going through, I could not compare it at all to what ladies who had gone before me had to go through. So that was my inspiration.
I hope y'all are taking notes because these women are dropping gems. It's incredible. Next, we have Auntie Glandis.
I was taking notes and learned some stuff along the way. I didn't do enough research ahead of time, so I appreciate the story on the 6WWII. When I think about where I draw inspiration, especially from women who came before me, it always has to do with grace and calm and that focus on the bigger picture that the story of the 6WWII referred to. And then earlier on when Kim was giving us the history and talking about the women who were called to work in a way that they hadn't done before and unceremoniously kicked out of these same jobs later on, and just the grace and patience and calm it must have taken to carry on with that. My probably closest personal experience with that, though nothing like the extremes we've heard about, was my grandmother, who was an Army bride at the time of World War II, and she and my grandfather came to New Orleans after the war. And I watched her. I learned more about her, of course, as I got older, and I didn't know how remarkable she was because she was so private about it. It wasn't something she bragged about, but learning what she would do to try to help others through her life. And I think there are lots of people who do that, but I think it's particularly unique to women who really get out there and do that. And she did it in her own quiet way that was in tune with her demeanor and her comfort and who she was. And truth be told, with very strong support from my grandfather, with whom she couldn't have done what she did, but she would work on systemic change, so things like the League of Women Voters that she traveled the state with, and the Public Affairs Research Council, and all these things where she could use her remarkable intellect to help provoke change. And the fact that I didn't know this for so much of my life really spoke to the humility she had as well, which translates to lifelong learning, which I think is great for all of us. And so that's a huge inspiration for me.
Thank you so much for sharing. Next, we have Adrinda Kelly.
Awesome. I am definitely taking notes, lots of notes. I'm so inspired by the inspirations that were shared already. I think when I think about World War II women from World War II, the word that comes up for me right away is grit. And you know, the person in my life who's been the first and perhaps the best example of that is my mother. She is the first person in her family to matriculate to college. She is the first person in her family to leave her small town North Carolina home via service in the military to move to New Orleans, the big city, and create a life here with her family. And she is absolutely a trailblazer in her profession, you know, often the first and sometimes the only Black legal secretary working in corporate law firms across the city. And so she raised 3 children on a secretary's salary, sent us all to college, you know, grasping for our own impact and success. And so I think about her and I draw a lot of inspiration from her diligence. You know, my mom is a true baby boomer. You know, say what you want about baby boomers. Baby boomers have the work ethic. And she and I saw her, you know, get up every day, work hard just to make things happen. I also learned, and this continues to be a lesson for me in my work, you know, my mother knows how to sit in discomfort. My mother knows how to be uncomfortable. She knows how to be the first. She knows how to be the only, you know, in a room. And, you know, given the work that I do, you know, leading a nonprofit that is doing work that has never been done before and doing work around racial justice, you know, having tough conversations with people and being committed to a difficult mission at a difficult time. My mother's lessons around how to sit in discomfort stay with me daily. I also was going to talk about 6888. Oh my goodness. What's interesting to me about 6888 that hasn't already been mentioned is that I believe it was an educator, Mary Mcleod Bethune.
Oh, come on.
Yes,
Yeah.
who advocated for, she was concerned about the lack of involvement of Black women in the service during this time of extreme, you know, women wanting to show up and serve their country at this time. She was concerned about the lack of access for Black women to do that. And so she was instrumental in helping to make sure 6888 happened. And I think about that because in my own work, you know, a personal hero of mine is Toni Morrison. She says, as you may know, listen, when you get in power, the point is to empower somebody else, right? And so I think about what Mary Mcleod Bethune did using her platform to make sure she helped make the case, right, for an opportunity for Black women to serve in the way that they did and did so phenomenally. And so I try to do that, live that out in my work every day. I'm definitely the most junior member on the panel. I'm learning my lessons in real time, but these are some of the women that I draw inspiration from.
Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Lastly, we have Jennifer Bolin Masterson.
All right, so you know, thinking about all the trailblazers, you know, women are just paving the way, and so I kind of reflected on some of the other women. There's so many, but you know, a couple to think about. You know, Mary Teresa Barra, she's the first female CEO of a major automotive company, GM. You got Katharine Graham, first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company in 1972, and that was the Washington Post. Carly Ferrano, who is the first female CEO of a Fortune 50 company in 1999 with Hewlett Packard. You got Cheryl Sandberg, who was the COO of Facebook and the author of Lean In. And if you've not read Lean In, please read that book, Lean In. Ursula Burns, she is the first African-American CEO in 2007 for Xerox. And then our own from Boeing, Leanne Corrett, who is the president and CEO of Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security Division. I look at these women and trailblazers. You talk about the confidence in them, their courage. I guarantee you through their careers, they were probably many, many times the only female at the table. And to do what they're doing in their career, their compassion for their team, because you don't get into that position without having that compassion. The elegance in their leadership for their divisions, in their organization. It's just inspiring to see them in work. Do they give up a lot? Absolutely. But they give it up for all of us to show that, you know what, I'm paving the way for you. I'm breaking those glass ceilings for you. And they're sharing with us that, guess what? They did it. I can do it. We all can do it. We all can do it together. And so, I just kind of reflect, and that inspires me just looking at these women continuing to succeed. And they didn't do it by themselves. They did it with each other. So that's something that really inspires me.
And that was just the first question, y'all. That was incredible. I don't even know how we can top that, but I'm gonna try. Or actually, it's y'all's job. I'm just giving you the questions. Our next question will go to Sonia Perez. Women during World War II played vital roles in telecommunications, from switchboard operating to breaking enemy codes. Telecommunications has changed a lot since the 1940s, as well as firsthand in your career, of course, with AT&T. What led you to decide a career in telecommunications, and then what advice would you give young women who are also considering this path for their career field?
I'd like to say that all along I planned to go work for AT&T. I knew what I wanted to do for a living. I knew what career I wanted, and really it was just luck. It was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time, and seizing an opportunity, and grabbing an internship working for a phone company. We called it the phone company back then, in Beaumont, Texas. Right, and then I interned in Houston the summer after that, and then in Austin as I was graduating from the University of Texas. But AT&T has always been the land of opportunity for women, and last year alone, our retention rate for women employees was 79%.
Very good.
And very, very proud of that. And some other interesting figures. I know, and of course, I wasn't the first. I was the first woman president of AT&T Louisiana. And thank you. I remember I'd been here 30 days, and I actually left my office to go to a meeting that the mayor, it was a committee that Mayor Landrieu had appointed me to, and we went around the table, everybody went around the table and introduced themselves. And I just said, I was last, and I said, hi, I'm Sonia Perez, I'm with AT&T. And a guy from across the room said, oh my gosh, you are the president. You are the new president. You don't look like any of the ones that came before you. And they all stood up and clapped. And I said, you know what? I'm going to love living here. I am. I just got to be me. So very proud. And I've got to tell you that, of course, I wasn't the first. The first black woman to graduate from MIT was named Dr. Shirley Jackson. And she came to work at AT&T not long after that. She is now the head of the Rensselaer Institute of Technology. She's still alive. And she pioneered research that helped develop fiber optic cables and caller ID. So we're very proud of our history with women. 36% of the recruits into our technology development program at AT&T are women, and there's the rub, right? It's 36%, which by other industries is by other companies is just very high, but it needs to be greater than that. And so the challenge that we take on every day as a company whose educational values mirror our communities, or we work to have them mirror our communities, get women involved, get young women involved. We lose them at middle school in the sciences and the math. And so we're very engaged with educational programs that seek to engage women within the sciences and the math so that they'll come to work for us someday. And then we're also very engaged with a movement called the See Her movement, which is really, as one of the largest advertisers in the world, we have made the commitment to assure that women are portrayed appropriately and accurately so that our daughters can see her and be her. So we're very proud of the See Her movement participation in which we're engaged.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you. Next, our next question goes to Cynthia Lee Shane. During World War II, women led several grassroots efforts on the home front to support the war in various ways. A lot of your career has been dedicated to grassroots efforts to improve our community. Could you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to become active in the betterment of Jefferson Parish, as well as what tips you would have for other women who are trying to do the same? That's a mouthful.
Yeah, I think, I think you're very fortunate if you know what you want to do. My kids are at that age where they're, 22 and 19, and girls going into college, many of them don't know what they want to do. How would you want to know what you want to do at 18? You haven't been exposed enough to the world. So I would say there were moments in my life that I just had the courage to take that direction. In terms of public service, if many of you don't know, my father was Sheriff Harry Lee. So I saw the love of public service that he had, but I would never be one to speak in public. I hated it. I was very shy. The college syllabus came the first day in college, and I would scan it quickly. Oral presentation. I would go drop that class the next day. So, it's true. So, so this is but I took a class at Loyola. It was a business class. I was scheduled to go get my MBA, and it was about the baby food industry and some quality and, problem, and babies were dying, and it was about the meat industry. That all happened, and I just was captivated by federal regulation, and I just made the switch to go and get my master's in public administration. And then when I got my job in immigration that I had for 10 years, it was because I went to one visit at Ellis Island and got captivated, and I switched careers. And then when I became into politics, it was because my husband sat on the sofa and says, "You need to run for politics," and it just got in. So my words of wisdom to the younger generation is that you never miss opportunities, and you think of opportunities as external things that happen to you. A job gets open, somebody taps you on the shoulder, just you take a trip and you happen to do. It's not just that. It's the internal openness that you have in your mind for something, that you give that to yourself, that you make a commitment that you're going to drive this road of your life and that you're worthy of this. Young girls who go to work, and I was like this, I would wait, I felt, and you used the words like, I think you said, given permission. Mm-hmm. Don't wait for somebody to give you permission. Don't wait for somebody to tap you on the shoulder. You have to have enough courage in yourself to say, I drive this car of my life. It's me. I don't need permission to show how good I am at work. I'm gonna work really hard, and I'm just gonna do it. And so that's what I would say to anyone. I tell my kids, if you don't like the college degree that you were getting, you have to have enough courage in yourself. I got the tuition, it's okay, to switch majors. Or you don't like the job you go into every day. You've got to think enough of yourself to quit that job and find something else. And that is not something that young people sometimes have that confidence in themselves. But, I would say you have to give that to yourself to make decisions. And I'll go so far as personal relationships, we all know, you gotta leave that guy or leave that friend who's dragging you down and make the switch, okay? So that would be my advice to other people.
I love that.
Leave your boyfriend, leave your friend that's giving you problems. That's my advice.
I want to point out, because I think it's, oftentimes we hear people talk and we don't necessarily absorb everything they're saying. We just kind of understand the general comments that they make. But you had so many amazing things that you said about first, one opportunity that you took led you to the next opportunity, and you were open enough to even accept that, because a lot of people don't even allow themselves to accept that. And then not only were you supportive of your kids, because unfortunately a lot of children don't have that guidance from anybody, let alone their parents, to take the avenues that make them happy, not what makes you happy, not what other people would see and say that it made them successful. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm sure that it hit me, and I'm sure it touched a lot of people as well. Thank you. Our next question goes to Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes. During World War II, women's competitive sports were certainly not as common as they were today. However, with men off to war, it gave women greater and new athletic opportunities. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if not all of us, have seen A League of Their Own, one of my favorite movies. Even after 80 years, you as a Black female, having experienced, I'm sure, quite a few firsts and onlys through your career as an athletic executive, what advice would you give to other aspiring trailblazers, especially those with athletic career goals, and just in general to chase their dreams?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question. One thing I guess I didn't share, I also have a program. It's called So You Want a Career in Athletics. I started that program 5 years ago. The program is focused on exposing girls to careers in sport. I played sports, well, let me preface it by saying this. This is the 50th year. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX.
Oh, yay, that's exciting.
Yes. Landmark legislation that gave women equal opportunities, sports, business. All of us are here because of Title IX, okay? But as a part of that, that was 72, I was born in 75, so as a young girl, I had the opportunity to participate in sport. I did cheer, I did basketball, I did track, and I got a scholarship to go to college and play sports. During my time growing up, what I wasn't prepared for was I wanted to be on TV, but at no point during my time as a student athlete did I ever think about working in sport. And one of the reasons why is because I never saw someone in my position outside of an assistant coach leading in sport. So here I am. I graduate in '97 from University of New Orleans. The coach who recruited me to University of New Orleans had taken the head coaching job at University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and she said, hey, why don't you come and I'll pay for your school, you can get your master's in communication, and you can be a graduate assistant coach. So I was like, oh, master's in communications, I'm still gonna be on TV, great, yes, I'll accept that. But what happened was, it was at the right place at the right time opportunity. I fell in love with coaching. I was like, these girls are the same age as me and they listen to me, let alone me. And the opportunity to lead young women, it was birthed in me at that moment. Now, that was to be head coach. I eventually became athletic director, where I've served now for 17 years, I think now. And again, throughout this journey, I'm trying to find other women to connect with, because the way I lead wasn't necessarily the same as the way men led. And one of the things I heard you say, I've heard grace, I've heard grit, compassion, collaboration, those are very strong characteristics for leadership, people who are leading. And you usually see that in women, but it wasn't always appreciated because they're looking sometimes for more bravado. But what you've seen with women is we can bring a group of people together and get some stuff done just like that, because those are strong leadership skills. So now I'm in charge of I'm in charge of mostly men, and I'm trying to figure out how to successfully do that. And so there wasn't a network for me. So You Want a Career in Athletics program was like, okay, I've been here for 17 years. It's time to create that pipeline. And so that program is geared toward, one, it's the see her kind of thing. It is They need to see us in the positions. They need to see someone with a bubbly, optimistic personality that's kind of all over the place. But, you know, I can command a room. People listen to me even when I'm not in charge. You know, I look like I'm in charge. I can speak in a way and they believe me, right? And they need to see someone that looks like me that's doing this, right? And that you can be successful. You can be on a panel, like with CEOs, like, oh my God, it's crazy. But they need to see this. And so part of that programming, part of the programming is really geared toward them. One, the leadership development piece, because when you look at numbers of leaders, women who are leading, when you look at executives, you're looking at about 94% of most female executives were athletes at some point. There's data that says that 94% of them had sports in their life at some point. They didn't have to play college or professional. Maybe they did biddy ball, you know, a middle school ball, but at some point, you know, they developed confidence in some of the things that we know are critical to leadership. That's one. So doing this, creating that program is about helping these young women figure it out, because here's what we know. Confidence is what we need, and you need a support system to help you develop that. As young women, as she said, we question sometimes. When she was talking about you got to be able to make that tough decision to move forward, we struggle with that. I remember struggling with that. And what better way to do that than to find other women who are doing the work and to create that network for them. And so my advice to young women looking for careers in sport is, one, never stop dreaming, never stop believing your dreams no matter what. You don't have to ask for permission to be who you were made to be. That's number two. And think of life as an algebraic equation. So I love the algebra. There's something that you won't know. We're always solving for X. That is the life. But if we will embrace the opportunities as Cynthia shared, and each opportunity that's brought toward us, we'll solve for one part of it, and then we'll have another X we have to solve for, but we grow. So chasing the dreams, having confidence, believing in yourself, and knowing that you don't have to have it all or know it all to be successful.
And I don't think Dr. Kiki's personality has gotten her anywhere in life. Seemed very bland, and no, not at all. I love the energy, and as a former, I was a health and PE teacher for 10 years and a coach, and so it's so important, and I was an athlete and a professional dancer in my college years, so all of that created such discipline and drive for me, so I appreciate you sharing that, because those little things, even though we may not do them in adulthood, we don't necessarily connect and make that direct correlation, but it truly is, and it does make a difference. So thank you for sharing that. Our next question will go to Colonel Sheila Barnado. Since World War II, women's service in the military has become more prevalent. Today, women make up roughly 16% of our nation's armed forces, compared to approximately 2% during World War II. Such a huge difference. During your highly decorated military career, you were assigned to be personnel command positions, including being one of the first women to lead an ROTC program. Throughout your career, which experiences and lessons learned along the way shaped your perspective on leadership as well as women in the military?
Well, thank you for that question. But first, I'd like to say I love following after you, Dr. Kiki, because when you said 94% of women who are in leadership roles, and you know, I'm that 6%. I'm in that 6%, had no sports background, no athletic background whatsoever. My husband can tell you I am the worst. But, so I'm the exception to that rule. In fact, everybody in my family was surprised when they found out that I had joined the Army. They were like, she did what? She doesn't even have the background for that. But anyway, it proves that you have desire and you work hard, you can do it.
There it is.
So anyway, that was an add-on, obviously. So again, looking at the experiences and then leadership as a woman in the military, that's what you ended up with, leadership as a woman in the military. First of all, what I and every young person who joins the military has to understand fully is military service is a tough profession. It's just a tough profession. So don't expect it to be easy. If easy is what you're looking for, don't join the military. And certainly don't join it as an officer expecting to be a leader, because those two don't go together. And then leadership is a contact sport. Yeah. You cannot be afraid to lead. You just can't. Leadership is not for the faint at heart. Leaders lead, period. Leadership, and what I call effective leadership, is developed day by day. The first step, again, going back to what I said earlier, is your own self-development and knowing yourself. Leadership is not determined, in my view, by gender, but by determination and then the character of the person. And so you find effective men who are leaders and those who are not. You find effective women who are leaders and those who are not. And then one of the pieces of advice that the Army gave, or certainly gave to me as a young officer, is take care of your people and they will take care of you.
Amen. That's right.
And what that meant
right.
was, if you spend your energy and your focus on taking care of them and what their needs are, you will never have to worry about what your needs are, because people respond to people who care for them.
Yep, that's right. That's right. That's right.
And so all of my successes, whatever they may have been, depended on the people who worked for and with me. And then another thing I would say is, I was blessed to have started my Army career working in direct support of combat arms leaders. Now, the combat arms leaders, they are the war fighters. They are the people who actually do what the Army's mission is. And so I was not a war fighter in that sense. I was a supporter of the war fighters. But by being in that world and seeing how they operated and what their needs were, I learned early on, this is what the Army is all about, or at least it's certainly what it's about for me as a supporter of the combat arms. I learned how they thought. I learned how they operated. And so all of that, in my view, helped me to be an effective and a caring leader. And of course, that was mostly from men, because when I came in, combat arms was closed to women. So I was not modeling myself after other women. There were so few of them in the force. There were a bunch of lieutenants like me running around, but what did we know? We were developing ourselves into becoming leaders. And so really my leadership style was modeled after men, and men who had been in combat. But I can tell you, I believe this is true, and I know there are other veterans in the room. People who have seen combat, men or women, but certainly men, they're some of the most caring people you'll ever run into, because they know the value of life.
Amen.
And that makes you care. You don't do foolish things when you have other people's lives in your hands. And so that's who I modeled my leadership style after. And then I'd say lessons learned as a leader: be honest, be consistent, be fair, be willing to endure hardships and sacrifices, just like your people will have to do. You need to be able to do the same thing. And then everyone in the Army, we're all told, all services, everyone in the Army is a soldier. It doesn't matter what your rank. At the end of the day, you're a soldier. All people in the Navy are sailors. At the end of the day, that's what you are. And so I say that to say, you're a soldier first, and be the best one you can be. Whatever it is you're supposed to do, and in my case, I knew what my role was, be the best at that. And that's effective leadership, and that's what I gained anyway, as a leader being in the military.
Definitely some words of insight and wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our next question will go to Auntie Glandis. During World War II, women became active in construction and manufacturing roles and were known as Rosie the Riveters. After the war, and even today, construction is primarily a male-dominated industry. How have you, as a female CEO in construction, built confidence and resiliency over the years, as well as where did that specific shaping moment come to you, if you can recall, during your journey?
Sure. So I've been learning a lot about myself and my journey from the speakers so far. So the See Her, that was a huge part of how I got where I am. There were always women leaders in my company, starting with my grandmother as chairperson of the board, and then Teresa Leger was a senior vice president of ours for 40 years. By the end of her career, that's where she landed. So I had all that See Her as you go along. And when I look back at that now, I realized I had enough privileges in life, but that was like a super key one for me in my professional development that I didn't recognize as a kid. I didn't understand what an advantage I had with that, of not seeing that barrier that many young women would have seen. I also learned that I was a college athlete, club sport, but I was captain of my sailing team, and like, oh, that's why this felt more natural than I felt like it should have. And I guess people apologize for cursing around women, which when you're a sailor and at construction is just kind of laughable. So I was kind of born into, in my life experiences, like prepped me for the industry in which I find myself. The moment when I guess I first realized this was unusual is the moment that came to me when thinking about this. I had been in my role as CEO for a couple of years, and I was at a conference of all construction CEOs. And people were always asking me at that point, oh, what's it like to be a woman in construction? It must be, strange, or how'd you get there, or whatever. And it was that I had the See Her, and I also came from a family of all women, and so that probably helped. But I go to this conference, and I look around the room, I'm like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And there are hundreds of people in the room. They're pretty much all white guys. And there are probably 10 women, half of whom are working the conference. And it was the first time somehow that I really got it. And that's where, again, that privilege came, that I was blind to that for so long. And I think, looking back on it, it's good to be in the minority every once in a while for that sense of self-awareness and to build empathy and all those things. And before that conference, before that moment, I didn't get things like women's professional groups. I didn't understand kind of the point, and I guess I didn't need, I thought, that support myself, but I came back and I got more involved with those kinds of things and trying to uplift other women in the same way that I had been uplifted and not even seen it. And so it built this wonderful awareness and gratitude for what I had and where I was. And we're in an interesting spot in the construction industry right now. Like many industries, we're facing workforce issues and all that, and it's bringing to a head the fact that women have been a missing element in the field of construction. And so there's a whole lot of effort right now to attract women to our field and show them what a viable, wonderful industry it is, and go back to those days of Rosie the Riveter and those excellent welds that only women could do, and bring it forward. And so, yeah, that's from that.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, my dad actually worked 30 years in construction before retiring, and I lead a ton of CPR training classes for a lot of construction companies, and I was floored by how little women were in the industry until I started actually becoming a part of it a bit more, and it's phenomenal, so thank you for answering that. Our next question goes to Adrena Kelly. During the 1940s, women were not often encouraged to pursue higher education over homemaking. Through the rest of the 20th century, those trends shifted, and today nearly 60% of college students are actually women. A lot of your work has been dedicated to developing resources for communities of color who do not often see college or even high school as an achievable goal for them. What experiences have led you to dedicate your career to this work, and what advice do you have for young women of color who are struggling with balance in school as well as other priorities?
I love this question. I am incredibly proud of the strides that women are making and have made in terms of access to higher education and leadership, and particularly Black women. You know, Black women today are the most educated demographic in our country, the most entrepreneurial, and this is a fact, despite, you know, ongoing challenges, right? Access to opportunities and whatnot. And so Black women in particular, and women in general for sure, are having a moment right now, and hopefully it's more than a moment, and I'm excited about that. But I think it also offers us a way of thinking about, you know, the young ladies, the students of color who are in our classrooms today. You know, the fact of the matter is, and I'll use myself as an example, children in our classrooms right now do not have, they do not lack imagination or aspiration or dreams about, you know, what it is that they want to do. What they lack are resources, opportunities, role models, as other folks have talked about. And when I reflect on my own experience, all of those things were certainly foundational and instrumental for me, you know, to kind of be on the path that I'm on. I am a New Orleans Public Schools graduate. I have to throw it out there because I'm super proud to be a McDonough 35. Yeah. A McDonough 35 graduate, graduated in the 90s. And so had a particular experience in our schools. And we know, you know, I know many of us are concerned and probably active in advocating around education issues in New Orleans. And we know that there's a lot of work to do. There's always been a lot of work to do. But the fact of the matter is there are also assets in our schools. And I absolutely benefited from the tremendous asset of all of these phenomenal Black educators who, beyond, you know, and including, you know, solid preparation and literacy and numeracy and access to college and all of that, deposited in me a spirit capital, right? Which I describe as just a deep self-knowing that I could do anything that I set my mind to, and a preparation to expect that it would not be easy, right? There was no Pollyanna, you know, preparation for me. I knew that there would be obstacles that I would have to face, but the preparation I got was just a deep knowing that I could face them. And so when I think about young women, particularly Black women, young ladies who are perhaps struggling, trying to balance it all, trying to figure out, you know, how to get from here to there, the number one thing I would say is, you know, the challenge has absolutely nothing to say and nothing to do with your ability to be successful, right? The challenge is there, and it often does not have to do so much with you as with the external circumstances around and opportunities or lack thereof around you. So I would say, number one, understand that the challenge has no prediction at all about what you can do. And I think there are some things you can concretely do to navigate the challenges a little bit more easily. For me, I've had to learn how to ask for help. You know, there's a bit of a superwoman thing that I'm actively unlearning, right? So I have had to learn that asking for help, leaning on folks to help me get from here to there is not an indication of weakness. It doesn't mean I'm not smart. It just means I'm efficient and I'm being smart about how to get from here to there. I think the other thing that I'm actively learning is that I have to say no, so my yes is more meaningful, right? When you are talented, when you're passionate about something, you often get called on to, you know, do a lot of things and pulled in a lot of different directions, which is great. But really, I'm here. I'm purpose-driven. I'm here to do my truest, most beautiful work. And so I have to be super clear, right, about what my yeses are. And that means I have to say no sometimes. But the no, it always comes with 5 names that I can offer of other Black women, of other women of color who can do what I've been asked to do. So I think that's important. And then finally, I would say, you know, there was a Beyonce reference earlier, so I'm gonna bring her in again. I think it's Move Forever. She says, there's a line that says, run your race. And basically what she is saying is, you know, stay in your struggle, run your race. I'm gonna put a positive spin on it. Don't compare yourself to anybody else, right? You're on your own timeline. You have your own gifts. No one can do exactly what you do the way that you do it, so do not compete. Just be you in the truest and most beautiful way that you know how to be. That would be the advice that I would give.
Very good. I love that, and it actually made me a little emotional with you saying that being a young Black woman, especially former educator, I feel like I'm always an educator, I just take a different approach. Representation truly does matter. I, unfortunately, and I say that unfortunately because this shouldn't be the case, I taught at a predominantly white school for the first half of my educational career, and then the second half in an open enrollment charter school. So we already know the difference of how that looks, and especially how challenging the education system is here in New Orleans, in the South, and in Louisiana. And unfortunately, I heard from so many of my students of all races and religious backgrounds that I was the only Black teacher that they had ever had. Yeah. And it was so jarring because that wasn't my experience growing up at all. My parents did a really great job at making sure that I experienced diverse situations, but unfortunately, a lot of kids just don't have that, so they don't always even have the opportunity to grow up to be amazing women like you guys. So I commend you for what you're doing, because I think that that is awesome and beyond. And even if you're not in any of these fields that these women are in, think about whatever situations that you guys are in and what opportunity that you can give the next person. It doesn't matter if they're older or younger than you, just we are not where we are because we did it on our own. We have allowed people to support us, and the more that we can do that, those blessings come back to us. So thank you for sharing that. And our final question goes to Jennifer Bolin Masterson. When many of us think about the early days of NASA and women's contributions, the movie and book, of course, a lot of us love, Hidden Figures, often comes to mind. However, during World War II, women worked as mathematicians at Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory in Hampton, Virginia, which designed and tested combat planes before the facility shifted its efforts towards the space race. Jennifer, could you tell us more about what led you to pursue a career in aeronautics, and then also what advice would you give other women who are considering a career or path in STEM?
Yeah, thank you. You know, back in high school, I was good in math, and so, you know, believe it or not, I'm like, hey, you know what? Accounting, they use numbers. I'm going to be an accountant. And so I took my first accounting class, and I went to my math teacher and said, oh no, this isn't gonna work for me. This is so boring. And I'm like, but you know I love math. And he's like, yeah, you do. I said, well, what can I be in life? Because accounting's definitely out the door now. And he's like, well, here's a list of things. Go do your research. And so I'm a freshman in high school researching, you know, what I want to be in life. And I come up and I'm looking at this. I'm like, this electrical engineering looks really cool. I'm going to build things. And so I remember going to my grandfather and telling him, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be an electrical engineer. I'm going to go to Purdue University. And he's like, you do know engineering is male dominated. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. And he's like, well, you want it? I'm like, yeah, I really want it. He's like, then go for it. I'm like, all right, that's what I'm going to be, an electrical engineer. Believe it or not, I went to Purdue University and I got my electrical engineering degree. And what that degree actually did was actually open up the doors for me. Started out in automotive. I was a tier 1 supplier for, some of you might understand the big three, but all of the industry, or all the leaders there, the makers there. And it really opened up my eyes on building things. And I'm like, this is really cool. Well, what else could I do? Then I got an opportunity to go into the boating industry, and we were marinizing engines for the yachts. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing this. This is neat. Got some new technology going on with GPS, and you know, this is really kind of a cool job. And then Boeing came into South Carolina, first time away from the Puget Sound area. They're going to build a plant, and they're going to build a 787. I'm like, that sounds really interesting. I think I want to go work for Boeing. So I got a job at Boeing building the first 787 coming out of Charleston, South Carolina. And I'm like, this is really neat. I am doing lots of cool things, and you know, no one's heard of composite airplanes. And then I'm like, Boeing tapped me on and said, hey, we got a facility in New Orleans and they're building a rocket. Do you want to go build the most powerful rocket ever being built? I'm like, oh, sign me up. I want that job, yes. Let's go. And, you know, I look at my career and it's like, okay, I've done land, I've done water, I did air, now I'm doing space. Wow. But I didn't do it on my own. I did it because I found women mentors throughout my whole career. And I think it's really important for all of us to make sure that we find those women mentors, because they're the ones that help us. and along with just your mentors of being able to share experiences, because I guarantee you the things you're going through, they've already gone through. And they're going to give you some advice to take or not take, up to you, so that you can continue to grow as a person. I also agree with, and I think several of you talked about it, us women need to support each other.
Amen.
And finding that group that supports you is so critical and so empowering, because we don't do it on our own. We do it as a team. And, you know, I've been blessed, and these are, you know, the advice I give to anyone that's going to go into STEM. It's challenging. Yes, women are still very underrepresented, but we can go do it. You see it with Rosie the Riveter, all of the panels here. We can go do that. And oh, by the way, we do it with each other, locking hand in hand together, going forward. It's also a myth, because a lot of them are like, oh, if I go into a STEM program, I got to give up things. Well, every job you have to give up things, but the one thing that I keep hearing about is, hey, I got to give up a family life. And that is so untrue. I'm able to have a family. My 17-year-old daughter's here with me and experiencing this great panel that we're with. And you get to have a family and you get to have a career. You get to have both. And we do it all together. So my advice to anyone going into that STEM, find those women mentors. Find a group of women that you can lift each other up, because you're going to have highs and lows. And they need to be there when you're on your low to help pick you up. And they need to be there when you're on the highs. And you're going to be there with them also. You get to bet the best of both worlds, and that's my recommendation and advice to anyone going into STEM.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you saying that, because I am so career driven, and I'm sure many people that are online and in this room are, and that's a challenge that I suffer with is, do I have to sacrifice my career or family? Can I have both? So to see your living proof of that, and I'm sure many of you guys on this panel and in this room for that matter is great. So thank you for sharing that. We have now come to the point in our program where we're going to open the floor to allow you guys to ask questions both online as well as in person. A couple of housekeeping rules. If you are online, please type your questions as a comment on Facebook or within the chat in YouTube or Vimeo. And then if you're in person, of course, raise your hand and then we'll have someone come to you guys and bring the mic. But we're going to get our first question started. So anybody in person or online? Now, all of these women have said amazing things. Y'all should be rushing to raise your hands up. Let's try that again. Any questions? Okay, there we go. We're going to bring you the mic, girl.
So I guess I'm going to, I'll ask all the ladies here, right? So I'm in aerospace as myself, working for Boeing. It is hard to juggle a family and a career. So I'm going to ask Kiki, do you have children, and what do you do, because you're such an athlete and just really just encompassing, how do you do it with balancing all of that? Because I know it's hard for me. I have a 16-year-old, kind of the same thing as Jennifer. Raising teenagers is not an easy thing, and having a career and a home life and running and cooking and cleaning. And so I'd ask you, I mean, how do you balance all that? Because I know a lot of young women coming up in our careers, they ex-nay having a family. And I think that's an important aspect of a whole round robin of being a woman and being in different industries, as we all are, and raising a family. So I'd ask you.
That's such a good question. So let me say this. I'm a workaholic, okay? Let me admit that. But one of the things that I think is important, I like to call it work-life integration. I think that we have been put in a box when people tell us how it's supposed to go. I don't think there's a one way. I think you have to figure out what works best for you and your family, and then you have to make that work. So part of that was the kids. My husband's here, Mark, And so we happened to both work at Dillard University. Kids grew up on campus, let me just be honest. And so one of the things is I just involved them with what I was doing. Come sit next to me. We're working on something and I'm explaining and exposing them to what I'm doing. But also we're having conversations about life. So then I'm getting to hear about, well, what's going on with school. And so we developed a relationship in that way. Like we were able to have our time. It wasn't at home around the table. COVID helped us to do that for the first time. And I was like, oh, so this is what it's like. It was a lot of fun for a moment, you know. We were sitting around the table, we were cooking together. It was very different because we were all over the place, right? But what we did was we made it work for us. So involving them in what we were doing and being involved with what they were doing is what we did to make it work. And that's what I would encourage any family to do. You have to figure out what works best for you to make those relationships. And we have really great relationships with the kids. It wound up working out, but I had to break out of the, I have to be at home and I'm not cook. I don't cook. Like, it's not what I do. I don't cook and I don't clean.
I don't either.
Yeah, my
daughter's
looking at me going, yep, that's her.
But let me say this. I mean, I think as women, like if we're going to do it, then we have to do. There are businesses that do this. Like there are people who make a career that do this. We hired some people to come in. I remember when I found the meal prep lady. Oh my gosh. I put in the order on Friday. She delivered meals on Sunday for the week. Healthy meals, like we're not stopping at McDonald's every day. Like, hey, we made it work. So, I mean, those are things that maybe we didn't know existed, or maybe we would be shamed because, oh, you're not at home cooking. You know, again, those things keep us in bondage and don't allow us to have the freedom in that relationship. So that make it yours.
I will add quickly on that. I think, you know, women, we feel guilty, right? And we go to work and we feel guilty that we might have to leave because one of our kids are sick. And when we're at home, we have to feel guilty. I got to work on a Saturday. I got to go out in the evening. And we got to change that in our head and don't apologize. You know, the most important thing to me is my family. That I make that clear at work. I made that clear on the campaign trail. You know, the best thing about me is that I love is being a mother. And I don't go to work apologizing for that. And I don't expect employees. I expect you to be professional at work, but I understand things in your family come and you're not going to be there. And I just ask you to be professional, have somebody else to cover for you. And then when I'm at home, the kids can work on you too, right? The kids can be like, oh, well, you're not at home and you're working. And I'm like, yeah, because that's what pays the food on the table. And you want to go, you know, to Dallas and for spring break, and guess who's paying for that? And I never let the kids do that to me, because they will. They'll hook on that. You know, they know you kind of feel guilty, and it's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to buy you this. Don't go down that, you know. Yeah. But you can't apologize. You're just living, you know, you're doing the best you can. Work is critical. Some people do it because they want to, but really it's paying the bills and it's keeping your family going. Yeah. And that's not something we can apologize for. But I will say, if you look at the salaries of women and you graft it, women, when they're younger, their salaries build, it dips. Yeah. And then you don't often regain it. Sometimes you do. And that's a problem, you know, but that's something but I wouldn't trade it for anything, so. Yeah.
I remember when I first came to work after I graduated from college, nobody said, you know, I really would like to leave early because my son has soccer practice. You just didn't say that. Today, that's the one thing that's going to get you off the hook on an assignment, is if you've got your kid at soccer practice, you go. You go be there for your child. You be there for your family. Our company isn't going to fall apart if you don't show up for this today. We'll get somebody else to do it. And so I think the environment really has changed. Yeah. I remember I used to walk into a conference room. I'd be the only woman, and the men would be there smoking and drinking coffee, right? And nobody talked about family. And that's all you talk about today. You get in the room. I mean, during this COVID environment, I've had team meetings where my managers have been sitting with their babies in their laps. I mean, life is real, or you can see the kids running in the background. Life is real, and it's okay. There is no such thing as a professional life and a personal life. There is only one life. One life that we lead. Literally. Yeah.
And that changed when women were in charge.
Come on now.
Which speaks to the need for the diversity in the different environments. So those things weren't considered because it wasn't their concern. And it's not a bad thing, it just wasn't the thing that they had to be concerned about. But when a woman's in charge and they remember having to take care of their young ones and, you know, being afraid to ask for those things, this is why we have to be at the table. This is why we need the opportunity to lead so we can make those kinds of changes in companies for the people that we serve.
Amen. I love that. And Dr. Kiki, just to add, my husband's here right now. I'm not going to point him out because I don't want to embarrass him, but I am too the person who sits at the table and does not eat. I mean, I'm done cook, but I eat. A professional eater at that. And I don't like to clean all that much, although I'm mad that I'm admitting that right now while he's here. But he does meal prep. He's my personal meal prepper, so that is. All right. I know, girl, I'm blessed, huh? I appreciate it. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. First, I want to thank our in-person audience as well as our online audience. Y'all were absolutely amazing, and thank you for supporting our panelists. And let's give it up one more time for our panelists. Thank you guys so much. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Kim LaDuff of the National WWII Museum.
Wow, that's about all I can say at this point. Just wow. Thank you, and I'm going to quote you, Adrena, for being your honest, beautiful selves tonight, sharing your stories, inspiring us. And, you know, I was reminded, I think the message came through again, make sure, you know, reaching back as we climb, making sure we're pulling someone up with us. And so thank you all. I felt the fellowship when we got together and prepared for this panel. Many of us met for the first time tonight, but I think you did a beautiful job. So thank you all so much, and let's give them another hand. I also want to thank April for doing a wonderful job of being our moderator. Special thank you to Maggie Hartley and her entire team for pulling this together tonight. We truly appreciate your work. Thanks to Kim Guise for our wonderful history lesson. And a special thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight. We really hope you enjoyed the programming. We hope that you'll come back and you make events like this possible. So thank you so much for being here with us. And please travel home safely. Have a good night. Thank you.